July 1996. The air in Santa Monica, California, thickened in the suffocating heat of summer. An eerily silent studio apartment. There were no flashing camera lights, no red carpets, no relentless paparazzi, and absolutely no cheers from an adoring crowd. After days of being unable to make contact, the police were forced to break down the door. What greeted them was not a silver screen starlet, but the distinct, pungent odor of a decomposing corpse. The victim lay there, isolated and broken. Autopsy report number 96-05124 from the Los Angeles County Medical Examiner's Office recorded a massive amount of toxic substance in the blood. Its name was Phenobarbital. This is a sedative belonging to the barbiturate class, operating by depressing the central nervous system. Understood in the simplest terms, this chemical slowly shuts down the brain, commands the lungs to cease breathing, causes the circulatory system to collapse, and sends the victim into an eternal sleep from which they can never awake. The coroner checked the box for the cause of death: suicide by overdose. The corpse lying on that bed was not a nameless individual. On her identification papers, it was Margaux Hemingway. She was 1.83 meters tall. She was once the face that defined the entire beauty standard of America in the 1970s. She was the first supermodel in the world to get her hands on $1 million contract, and most importantly, the blood of a great dynasty flowed through her veins. She was the biological granddaughter of the Nobel Prize-winning literary giant, Ernest Hemingway. Fate always has a way of arranging the cruelest details. Margaux's body was discovered on July 1st, but forensic doctors estimated that she had taken her last breath 1 or 2 days prior. Aligning with the historical timeline, the day of her departure coincided exactly with the 35th anniversary of the day her great-grandfather put the barrel of a Boss & Company double-barreled shotgun in his mouth and pulled the trigger in Ketchum, Idaho, on July 2nd, 1961. The media immediately jumped in. They hastily splashed massive headlines, attributing her death to the Hemingway Curse, a hereditary clinical depression syndrome that had claimed the lives of 5 people in the family. It was a perfect explanation, a brilliant medical smokescreen to cover up the true crime. The truth is, Margaux Hemingway's death was not a spontaneous event caused by an unlucky genetic code. That fatal dose of phenobarbital was merely the straw that broke the camel's back. The leverage for this suicide had been intentionally set up 2 decades earlier. Her death sentence did not begin in a shabby Santa Monica apartment, but was signed and approved in the red-carpeted boardrooms of Hollywood's elite. Starting from the day the entertainment industry machine decided to put her on the scale, they dissected her bloodline legacy, priced her physical body, and turned that beauty into a cold money-printing machine. Margaux Hemingway did not just naturally die. She was consumed, squeezed dry to the very last drop of commercial value, before being discarded as biological waste by the capitalist system. Rewinding the timeline back to 1975, America was drowning in a thirst for new icons. Margaux Hemingway, at the age of 21, emerged like a brilliant explosion. She did not possess the fragile or demure beauty of the previous generation's starlets. She was wild, tall in stature, with thick eyebrows and a liberated smile. But above all, what made her most valuable was the phrase attached to her name, Ernest Hemingway's granddaughter. In the public's eyes, she was the embodiment of the perfect combination between raw beauty and aristocratic intellect. The capitalists immediately caught the scent of an open gold mine. Fabergé, the giant dominating the cosmetics industry at the time, made the decisive move. They slammed a $1 million contract on the table, demanding that Margaux become the exclusive face for their new fragrance line named Babe. $1 million in 1975 was an unimaginable figure, enough to shatter all financial records in the fashion industry. With her signature on that authorization paper, Margaux officially became the highest-paid supermodel in history. However, the nature of this transaction was not a celebration of beauty. Financially, Fabergé was calculating the ROI, Return on Investment Index. They were not simply paying for Margaux's face, they bought out the Hemingway brand outright. They quantified literary legacy, public curiosity, and a young girl's physique into an asset that guaranteed revenue. the media machine began operating at full capacity. In June 1975, Margaux's face sat prominently on the cover of the prestigious Time magazine with the dazzling headline, "New York's New Supermodel." The crowd went wild. Sales of the Babe fragrance skyrocketed vertically. Margaux became the queen of the Studio 54 Club, rubbing shoulders with Liza Minnelli and Bianca Jagger. Everything sparkled like a gold-plated dream. But to the Alliance of Hollywood Film Studios, the cosmetics sector's $1 million was just loose change scattered on the banquet table. They craved an even more colossal profit. They wanted to exploit the largest core value of the Margaux asset. To maximize cash flow, cinema was the inevitable launching pad. Paramount Pictures and legendary producer Dino De Laurentiis jumped into the fray. They did not care that Margaux had never taken a single professional acting class. They were unbothered by the fact that she suffered from dyslexia, making memorizing scripts sheer torture. In the eyes of the executives, Margaux was not an actress. She was a box office bait. They only needed the Hemingway label printed boldly on giant posters hanging along Hollywood Boulevard. The project named Lipstick, 1976, was conceived. The PR team painted a perfect artistic vision, promising this would be a cinematic classic that would launch her into the ranks of A-list stars. They poured sweet words into her ears about silver screen glory, about how she would carry on her family's artistic legacy. The public lined up to buy tickets, eagerly awaiting the appearance of the million-dollar beauty in her debut role. Everything was orchestrated too perfectly. Behind the flawless marketing plans, behind the superficial smiles of the tycoons, no one told Margaux the cruel truth. The script she had just eagerly signed was, in reality, a psychological slaughterhouse. The Hollywood machine had prepared a razor-sharp blade, waiting to carve up her glamorous exterior and throw her into one of the most sleazy, exploitative projects in cinematic history. 1976. Paramount Pictures officially began filming the project Lipstick. In press releases, the Film Studio Alliance called it a psychological thriller, a powerful message about feminism. The script revolved around Chris McCormick, a famous fashion supermodel. This character was brutally raped by a music teacher. The perpetrator was then acquitted by the court thanks to legal loopholes. Outraged and desperate, the model took up a hunting rifle herself and shot him dead to demand justice. The linguistic wrapper was beautiful, but the core of this project was entirely rotten. In reality, Lipstick belonged to the rape revenge genre, a cheap exploitation film branch that flourished in the 70s. The characteristic of this film genre is the use of sexual violence and the explicit exhibition of women's bodies for the purpose of clickbaiting audiences. They did not throw money at hiring Margaux for her talent. They needed a media launching pad. They needed the Hemingway name. To push public curiosity to the maximum limit, the elite made a cruel decision. They brought Mariel Hemingway, Margaux's younger sister, into the film. Remarkably, Mariel was only 14 years old at the time. Her role? To be the witness and the next victim of the music teacher. Through a calculated casting trick, the producers intentionally blurred the lines between real life and the screen, dragging both sisters of the prestigious family into a mud pit of psychological violence. On set, the cruelty began to manifest. In the 70s, Hollywood had no concept of an intimacy coordinator. There were no on-call psychologists. Margaux was thrown directly into violently explicit scenes. Director Lamont Johnson did not guide her in internal acting techniques. He needed real panic, real fear, real resistance. The human nervous system is not programmed to clearly distinguish between acting trauma and real-life trauma. When a woman is forced to experience the feeling of being suppressed, screaming, and simulating the process of being violated dozens of times under high-wattage lights, the brain registers it as a physical trauma. They drained her mental strength, turning her actual panic into the sharpest cinematic footage. In April 1976, the movie hit theaters. Critics immediately swarmed in to tear Margaux apart. Time magazine, which only months prior had praised her as a beauty icon, now mocked her acting. Articles criticized her as stiff, lifeless, and ridiculous. The crowd laughed at her naivety on screen, but at the box office, revenue still poured in thunderously. The public didn't flock to the theaters to enjoy art. They paid money to satisfy voyeurism. a deviant desire to peep at the pain of others. They wanted to see with their own eyes how America's most expensive supermodel, Ernest Hemingway's granddaughter, was stripped and humiliated on the big screen. The capitalists pocketed massive profits from that morbid curiosity. The financial mission was complete. The cold industrial machine turned its back. They walked away with suitcases of cash, leaving Margaux with a shredded resume and a shattered nervous system. The consequences of exploitation never kill the victim instantly. It insidiously erodes them like a metastasizing cancer cell. Stepping away from the set of Lipstick, Margaux fell freely into the abyss. To cope with unnamed traumas and the pressure to maintain a supermodel physique, she turned to the most instinctive defense mechanism, numbing the mind. Alcohol and drugs became her daily painkillers. She slid down into endless partying nights at Studio 54, trying to use camera flashes to mask the emptiness. At the same time, medical records noted that she began suffering from bulimia nervosa. This is a disorder of uncontrollable binge eating, followed by self-induced vomiting or abuse of laxatives. This medical concept might sound like just a digestive trouble, but in reality, it is the desperate scream of a person who has lost control. When your body is turned into a commodity by the entertainment industry, violated on screen, and scrutinized by the public for every gram of excess fat, controlling the amount of food you take in and vomit out is the only power you have left. 2 consecutive broken marriages with Errol Wetson and Bernard Faucher drained the last of her emotional energy. A severe skiing accident in 1984 forced her to be bedridden, bringing about uncontrollable weight gain and persistent seizures. As her beauty began to fade under the side effects of sedatives and alcohol, the Hemingway brand plummeted uncontrollably. This was the moment the corporate machine revealed its true form as a cold-blooded monster. When Margaux's profitability index hit rock bottom, contracts evaporated. The phone stopped ringing. The producers who once rolled out the red carpet to welcome her now treated her like a disease to be avoided. To cover living expenses, the woman who once possessed a $1 million contract had to humble herself by posing nude for Playboy magazine in 1990. They promised it would revive her career. In truth, it was just an attempt to squeeze out the last bit of physical value before discarding her completely. In 1991, financial tragedy knocked on her door. Margaux officially filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy in federal court. Understood in legal terms, this is an order for total liquidation. It means you are stripped bare to your last penny and all your assets are put up for foreclosure to pay off debts. At this point, the information blockade and whitewashing strategy of the power system operated more smoothly than ever. Not a single studio executive stood up to take responsibility. Not a single brand mentioned how they had pushed a young girl into a toxic environment. Instead, the media turned away and molded a new narrative. They labeled her an addict. They dragged the death of her grandfather Ernest out as a smokescreen. They blamed genetics. They explained her downfall with the phrase, "the Hemingway family curse." The calculated ignorance of an entire system completely severed Margaux's safety net, pushing her to the fringes of society. They casually counted their money from the remnants of the movie Lipstick, leaving her to struggle against the darkness in a lonely apartment until she was completely swallowed by that very darkness. August 1996. A quiet burial ceremony took place at the Ketchum Cemetery, Idaho. Margaux Hemingway's ashes were brought back to rest right next to the resting place of her grandfather, Ernest Hemingway. This scene of returning to one's roots was the final puzzle piece to complete a perfect media whitewashing campaign. Radio stations, television networks, and newspapers across America simultaneously broadcast news reports summarizing her life. They encapsulated 42 years of a human being's existence on this earth into a single phrase, a hereditary tragedy. That was a conceptual switch of historical proportions. Blaming the genetic code is always much easier and safer than having to admit to a crime, because if they didn't borrow the Hemingway curse as a medical shield for protection, the Hollywood elite would have had to face a massive moral indictment. They would have had to stand before the court of public opinion to explain, why did a 21-year-old girl, completely healthy, full of vitality, and with no history of mental illness whatsoever, walk off the set of the movie Lipstick with a shattered nervous system? The power system could not let the public realize a fatal truth: that it was their own cold-blooded operational structure that pulled the trigger, not the ghost of a deceased literary giant. In economic terminology, there is a term called depreciation of fixed assets, simply understood as the inevitable decline in the value of machinery after a long period of being forced to operate at full capacity to generate profit. The Film Studio Alliance and capitalists applied this exact, heartless financial principle to the living body of Margaux. When she was young and her beauty could be converted into millions of dollars, they exploited her. When her physical and mental health collapsed under the pressure of the system, they classified her into the expired assets group and mercilessly threw her away. Today, if you access cinematic archives, the algorithm will show you the panicked footage in lipstick. This work is sometimes still praised by a few easygoing critics as a film with an edgy feminist message from the 70s. On online auction sites, the Babe perfume advertising posters featuring Margaux's image are still bought and sold with sky-high collectible value. The public looks at those materials and sees glory. They see an iconic masterpiece of beauty, but through the lens of objective truth, that is not an artistic legacy. It is an archive storing evidence of a crime. The original tape of lipstick is, in reality, an exploitation scene recorded in high resolution. There, the industrial machine casually turned the genuine panic, internal conflict, and psychological trauma of a woman into a mass entertainment commodity. Her radiant smile on the perfume bottle box does not represent freedom. It is the most visual relic of a systematic financial exploitation, where they priced a human being, squeezed out their vitality to push revenue to the peak, and then kicked them to the fringes of society when their commercial value hit rock bottom. Margaux Hemingway was never a fallen star because of her own weakness. She was a biological waste product eliminated by a cruel production line. They bought out her beauty. They consumed her bloodline surname. And when there was nothing left to scavenge, they left her to die alone in a shabby apartment, then conveniently stole her right to be remembered by history as a victim of the Hollywood machine. The file named Margaux Hemingway is officially closed, but the assembly line of that corporate machine has never stopped operating. It is simply relubricating its gears, searching for a new name, a new beauty, to continue chewing and swallowing.